The village elder's pronouncement fell like a hammer on stone, and Mara felt every eye in the council chamber turn toward her with the weight of a death sentence. 3 tests, Elder Brennan repeated, his thin lips barely moving beneath his silver beard. Pass them all within the span of 3 days, or leave our territory before the week's end. Mara's tusks ached where she clenched her jaw, her green fingers tightening around the worn fabric of her travel cloak. She had known this would not be simple. Nothing ever was for an orc woman seeking refuge in human lands, but she had nowhere else to go. Her clan had cast her out for refusing to marry the war chief's son, for speaking against the endless raids on human settlements, for daring to suggest that perhaps orcs and humans could find peace instead of perpetual bloodshed. The irony was not lost on her, that she now stood before a council of humans who looked at her with the same suspicion and contempt her own people had worn when they drove her away. The first test, Elder Brennan continued, his voice echoing off the rough timber walls of the meeting hall, will be one of strength. You claim to seek honest work, to contribute to our community. Tomorrow at dawn, you will help clear the northern field of stones so it may be plowed for spring planting. The field has defeated 3 strong men this past month alone. Mara nodded once, sharp and certain, physical labor she could manage. Her orc heritage gave her strength that most humans lacked, though she had never used it for anything but honest toil since leaving her clan 6 months ago. The second test, the elder went on, and something in his tone made Mara's stomach tighten, will be one of knowledge. You will assist our healer, Mistress Elspeth, in treating whatever ailments present themselves over the course of the 2nd day. We will see if your kind possesses any useful skills beyond wielding weapons. The casual cruelty of the word stung, but Mara kept her expression neutral. She had learned herb lore from her mother, who had been a shaman before the new war chief had silenced her voice permanently. Mara could set bones, brew fever remedies, and knew which plants eased pain and which brought poison. She would pass this test too. The third test, Elder Brennan said, and now his pale eyes gleamed with something that looked almost like satisfaction, will be one of character. You will spend the 3rd day in solitary reflection in the old stone shrine beyond the village boundary. No food, no water, no comfort. Only your thoughts and whatever gods you creatures pray to. If you emerge at sunset still determined to live among us, still claiming to have renounced the savage ways of your people, then and only then will we consider granting you permission to remain. The room fell silent except for the crackling of the hearth fire and the whisper of winter wind against the shutters. Mara opened her mouth to accept the terms, to thank the council for even this grudging opportunity, when a voice rang out from the back of the hall. I will take the tests with her. Every head swiveled toward the speaker, and Mara's heart stuttered in her chest. Jacob Thornwood stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking out the gray afternoon light. Snow dusted the shoulders of his wool coat, and his dark hair was disheveled as though he had run all the way from his farm at the edge of the village. His jaw was set in that stubborn line Mara had come to recognize over the past week, ever since she had helped pull his wagon from the frozen mud of the East Road, and he had insisted on repaying her kindness with a hot meal and a place to sleep in his barn. Jacob, Elder Brennan said, his voice sharp with warning, this does not concern you. It does if I am offering to sponsor her, Jacob said, striding forward into the hall with the confidence of a man who had served in the territorial militia for 10 years before taking up farming. The old laws say any citizen in good standing may sponsor an outsider seeking residence. I invoke that right. A murmur rippled through the council members and the handful of villagers who had gathered to witness Mara's judgment. Elder Brennan's expression hardened into something that looked like granite weathered by centuries of frost. You would stake your reputation, your standing in this community, on an orc. The way he said the last word made it sound like a curse, like something foul to be spat out. Jacob's blue eyes never wavered. I would stake it on Mara, who helped me when my wagon wheel broke, and I was stranded in the cold with a load of winter grain that would have rotted if I'd lost it. I would stake it on someone who has shown me more courtesy and kindness in a week than some of my human neighbors have shown in years. Mara wanted to speak, to tell Jacob he did not need to do this, that she could face the tests alone, but her throat had closed around words that would not come. No one had ever stood up for her before, not like this, not when it cost them something. Elder Brennan leaned forward in his carved chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. If you sponsor her, the tests become yours as well. You understand this. If she fails, you fail. If we find her wanting, we find you wanting. You would risk becoming an outcast in your own village for the sake of a creature you have known barely a handful of days. I would, Jacob said simply. The tests are meant to prove worthiness to live among us, to contribute to our community, to demonstrate character and skill and determination. If Mara must prove these things, then I will prove them alongside her. Let the council judge us both. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Mara could see the conflict playing across Elder Brennan's weathered face. The old laws were sacred in this territory, forged generations ago when the first human settlers had carved homesteads from the wilderness, and learned that survival depended on standing together. To deny Jacob's right to sponsor would be to break with tradition, to undermine the very foundations of their society's rules. Finally, Elder Brennan exhaled slowly through his nose. Very well. The tests will be administered to both of you, dawn tomorrow for the field clearing. The second day with the healer. The third day in the shrine. But know this, Jacob Thornwood, if she fails, you will both be required to leave these lands. Is that understood? Understood, Jacob said. Mara found her voice at last. Understood, she echoed, though her mind was reeling. The council dismissed them with curt nods and dark looks, and Mara followed Jacob out into the cold afternoon air. Snow was falling more heavily now, fat white flakes that caught in her dark hair and melted against her green skin. She caught Jacob's arm before he could walk away, her fingers surprisingly gentle despite her strength. "Why did you do that?" she asked, searching his face for answers. "You have put everything at risk, your home, your place here, for me." Jacob looked at her, and something in his expression made warmth bloom in her chest despite the winter cold. "Because it was not right," he said. "The way they spoke to you, the way they looked at you, you deserve better than to face their prejudice alone. And because," he paused, seeming to struggle with the words, "because in the short time I have known you, you have shown yourself to be brave and kind and honest. Those are qualities worth defending, regardless of whether your skin is green or brown or any other color." Mara felt her eyes sting with tears she refused to let fall. Orcs did not cry in front of others. It was seen as weakness, as shameful. But Jacob was not orc, and the way he looked at her suggested he would not find her tears shameful at all. "Thank you," she managed, her voice rough. "I will not let you down, I promise." "I know you would not," Jacob said. "Now come on. We should get back to the farm and prepare. Dawn comes early, and that northern field is going to be brutal." They walked together through the village, past houses with shuttered windows and doors that closed a little too quickly as they passed. Mara had grown used to the fear and suspicion in human eyes, but having Jacob beside her made it easier to bear. He did not seem to notice the stairs, or perhaps he simply did not care. He pointed out landmarks as they walked the mill where grain was ground, the smithy where the blacksmith's hammer rang out even on winter afternoons, the small schoolhouse where children learned their letters. "Do you have schools in orc clans?" Jacob asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice, not the morbid fascination she sometimes encountered from humans who saw orcs as exotic monsters. "Not like that," Mara said. "We learn from our elders, usually in family groups. My mother taught me herb lore and the histories of our people. My father taught me to track and hunt. There was a weapon master who trained all the young ones in combat because our clan believed everyone should know how to defend themselves." "Was it hard to leave?" Jacob asked quietly. Mara considered the question as they turned onto the snow-covered road that led to his farm. "Yes," she said finally. "But staying would have been harder. I could not be who they wanted me to be. The war chief's son, Grokthar, he was cruel. He enjoyed the raids, enjoyed the killing. When he chose me as his bride, I knew what my life would become. I would be expected to bear his children and support his ambitions and say nothing when he came home boasting of the humans he had slaughtered." She shook her head. "I could not do it. My mother raised me to believe healing was more honorable than harm, so I refused him, and the clan cast me out for bringing shame upon them." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. "That took courage," he said. "More courage than most people ever have to show." "Or foolishness," Mara said with a wry twist of her lips. "I am not certain there is much difference sometimes." That drew a laugh from Jacob, warm and genuine, and Mara felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. They reached his farm as the early winter twilight began to deepen, turning the snow-covered fields into a landscape of blue shadows and soft white curves. The farmhouse was modest but well kept, with smoke rising from the chimney and lamplight glowing in the windows. The barn stood nearby, its doors firmly shut against the cold. "You are still welcome to sleep in the house," Jacob said, as he had offered every evening since Mara had helped him with his wagon. "The barn is too cold, even with the animals' warmth." "The barn is fine," Mara said, as she had said every evening. "I do not wish to cause you more trouble than I already have." "You are not trouble," Jacob said firmly. "And after today, I think we are in this together. Partners in proving the council wrong, yes, partners." The word settled into Mara's chest like a warm coal. She nodded. "Yes, partners." That night, lying in the hay loft with Jacob's horses shuffling peacefully below, Mara stared up at the dark rafters and tried to calm the whirlwind of her thoughts. Tomorrow would bring the first test, and while she was confident in her strength, she knew the council would be watching for any excuse to declare her unfit. They wanted her to fail. Elder Brennan had made that abundantly clear. The tests were designed not to give her a fair chance, but to drive her away while maintaining the appearance of justice. But now Jacob would be tested too. If she failed, he failed. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her like a physical thing. She could not bear the thought of costing him his home, his place among his people, because of her own shortcomings. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it brought dreams of stone fields and judgmental eyes and Jacob's voice saying, "I will take the tests with her over and over until it became a rhythm like a heartbeat." Dawn broke cold and clear, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. Mara was already awake, had been for hours, her mind too restless for true rest. She climbed down from the hay loft and found Jacob waiting for her outside the barn, 2 wooden cups of steaming tea in his hands. "I thought you might need this," he said, offering her one. The cup was warm against her cold fingers, and the tea was strong and bitter and exactly what she needed. "Thank you," she said, then hesitated. "Jacob, are you certain about this? There is still time for you to change your mind. I can face the tests alone." "I am certain," Jacob said without hesitation. Besides, I have been meaning to help clear that northern field for weeks. The council just gave me a good excuse to finally do it. They walked to the northern field together as the sun climbed higher, turning the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling expanse of white and gold. Other villagers had already gathered when they arrived, forming a loose semicircle around the field's edge. Mara recognized Elder Brennan and several other council members, along with a handful of curious onlookers who had come to watch the orc woman be put to the test. The field itself was a disaster. What should have been rich farmland ready for spring plowing was instead a chaos of stones, some small as fists, others large as sheep. They jutted from the frozen earth at odd angles, crowding so thick in places that barely any soil showed through. Mara understood immediately why 3 men had given up on clearing it. This was not a day's work. It was a season's work, perhaps longer. Elder Brennan stepped forward, his breath misting in the cold air. "The terms are simple," he said, his voice carrying across the frozen field. "By sunset, this field must be cleared enough to plow. Every stone removed and stacked at the southern border. If you fail, the first test is failed. Do you understand?" "We understand," Jacob said. Mara simply nodded and set down her teacup, then removed her heavy cloak. The cold bit at her through her wool tunic and trousers, but she would need freedom of movement for this work. Beside her, Jacob did the same, stripping down to his shirt sleeves despite the winter chill. "Then begin," Elder Brennan said. Mara walked out onto the field, her boots crunching through the crusted snow, and bent to grasp the nearest large stone. It was wedged deep in the half-frozen earth, its surface slick with ice. She set her stance, felt the strength in her legs and back and shoulders, and pulled. The stone resisted, then suddenly gave way, nearly sending her sprawling. She caught her balance and carried it to the southern edge of the field, her muscles warming with the effort. When she returned, Jacob was already wrestling with another large stone, his face set in concentration. They worked in silence at first, finding a rhythm. Mara would take the largest stones, using her orc strength to lever them free and carry them away. Jacob focused on the medium-sized rocks, working quickly and efficiently. The pile at the southern border began to grow. An hour passed, then 2. The sun climbed higher, but gave little warmth. Mara's hands grew numb despite her exertions, and she could see Jacob's breath coming in harsh gasps, clouds of white in the cold air. The watchers remained on the field's edge, silent and judging. No one offered water or encouragement. No one suggested a rest. "How are you holding up?" Mara asked during one trip to the stone pile when she and Jacob arrived at the same moment. "I have been better," Jacob admitted, rolling his shoulders, "but I have also been worse. During my militia days, we once had to dig defensive trenches through rock-hard ground during a 3-day siege. This is almost pleasant by comparison." Mara smiled despite her exhaustion. "You have stories I would like to hear someday. And I would like to hear yours," Jacob said. "Once we finish proving we are worthy of basic human decency, that is." They returned to the field and the work continued. By midday, Mara's shoulders ached and her hands were raw despite the calluses years of labor had given her. Jacob was limping slightly, favoring his left leg, though he did not complain. The field was perhaps a third cleared, which meant they were behind schedule. Mara calculated quickly at this rate they would not finish by sunset. They would fail. The thought sent a spike of desperation through her chest. She could not fail. Could not cost Jacob his home because she was not strong enough, not fast enough. She pushed harder, moved faster, ignored the burning in her muscles and the way her hands had started to bleed where the rough stone edges cut through her cold, numbed skin. "Mara, slow down," Jacob said, catching her arm as she passed him. "You are going to hurt yourself." "We are running out of time," Mara said. "We have to move faster." "Not if it means injuring yourself," Jacob said firmly. "We will finish, trust me." "How can you know that?" Mara demanded, frustration and fear making her voice sharper than she intended. "Look at what remains. Look at how much we still have to clear." "We can," Jacob interrupted. "But not if we burn ourselves out trying to do the impossible alone. Come here." He led her to a section of the field where the stones seemed particularly dense, almost forming a natural wall. "See this," he said. "These stones are all touching each other, supporting each other's weight. If we try to move them one at a time, it will take hours. But if we're smart about it, if we find the right stone to pull first, the others will shift and become easier to move." Mara studied the arrangement, then slowly nodded. "Like pulling a keystone from an arch." "Exactly," Jacob said. "Work smarter, not just harder. That is what my father always told me." They identified the key stones in each dense cluster and worked together to remove them, and suddenly the work went faster. Stones that had seemed impossibly wedged came loose more easily. The pile at the southern border grew more quickly. The sun continued its arc across the sky, and Mara no longer felt the panicked certainty of failure. They had a chance. By late afternoon, they had cleared nearly 2/3 of the field. Mara's entire body ached, and she could see that Jacob was struggling too, his movements slower and more careful. But they did not stop. They could not stop. The watchers remained on the field's edge, though their numbers had thinned as the day wore on and the work proved less exciting than they had hoped. "Almost there," Jacob said, his voice hoarse. "We can do this." The final hours blurred together in a haze of effort and cold and stubborn determination. Mara lost count of how many stones she carried, how many times she bent and lifted and hauled. Her focus narrowed to the immediate task: find the next stone, pull it free, carry it away, return for another. Beside her, Jacob maintained the same relentless pace, neither of them willing to be the one who gave up first. When Elder Brennan finally called out, "Sunset approaches," Mara straightened and looked around in surprise. The field was clear. Not perfectly, there were still some smaller stones scattered here and there, but the major obstacles were gone, stacked in an impressive cairn at the southern border. A plow could easily work this earth now. Jacob leaned on his knees, breathing hard, his face flushed with exertion. Mara felt her own legs trembling with fatigue, but they had done it. They had passed the first test. Elder Brennan walked out onto the cleared field, his expression unreadable. He examined the ground, walked the full length and breadth of it, studied the pile of removed stones. Finally, he returned to where Mara and Jacob stood waiting. "The field is adequately cleared," he said, and the words sounded like they pained him. "The first test is passed. Tomorrow you will report to Mistress Elspeth at first light. Do not be late." He turned and walked away without another word, the remaining watchers following in his wake. Soon, Mara and Jacob stood alone in the clearing dusk, the field stretching empty and peaceful around them. "We did it," Jacob said, and suddenly he was laughing, the sound bright and relieved in the cold air. "By all the saints, we actually did it." Mara felt a smile pulling at her lips despite her exhaustion. "We did," she agreed. Then, because words seemed insufficient, she added, "Thank you. For everything. For standing with me." Jacob's laughter faded into something softer, something Mara could not quite name. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I told you we are partners in this." They walked back to the farm through the gathering darkness, both too tired for much conversation. Jacob insisted Mara come into the house this time, and she was too exhausted to argue. The warmth hit her like a physical wave when she stepped through the door, and she nearly groaned with relief, as sensation returned to her frozen fingers and face. Jacob's home was simple but comfortable, with a large fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy wooden table in the center of the main room. Shelves held books and tools and various household items, all neat and organized. It was the home of a man who lived alone but took pride in his space. "Sit," Jacob said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "I will make something hot to eat." Mara sank into the chair gratefully and watched as Jacob moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. He built up the fire, put a pot of water on to boil, began slicing vegetables and dried meat into the pot with quick, sure motions. It was strangely intimate, watching him work in his own space, seeing this glimpse into his daily life. "You are a good cook," Mara observed as delicious scents began to fill the room. "I have had plenty of practice," Jacob said with a wry smile. "When you live alone, you learn quickly or you eat very poorly. My mother tried to teach me when I was young, but I did not pay enough attention. I learned better after she passed, and it was just my father and me. Then he passed too, and it was only me, and I had to figure it out properly." "I am sorry," Mara said quietly, "for your losses." Jacob shrugged, though Mara could see the old grief in the set of his shoulders. "It was several years ago now. The fever took my mother when I was 15. My father lasted until I was 22, working himself into an early grave trying to keep the farm running without her. I sometimes think he simply did not want to go on without her." He paused in his chopping and looked at Mara. "What about your family? You mentioned your mother taught you herb lore." "She did," Mara said. "She was wise and strong, and the war chief feared her influence. When he took full power of the clan, he had her killed. Made it look like an accident during a hunt, but everyone knew the truth. We just could not prove it, and even if we could, who would have challenged him? My father tried. They killed him too." The words came out flat and matter-of-fact, but Jacob stopped what he was doing and came to crouch beside her chair. "Mara, I am so sorry. That is horrible." "It was 5 years ago," Mara said. "I have had time to grieve, but I still miss them. I still wish I could ask my mother's advice or hear my father's laugh." She looked at Jacob, at his open, honest face, and felt something crack open in her chest. "I think they would have liked you. My mother would have said you have a good spirit. My father would have tested you with impossible riddles and then laughed when you got frustrated." Jacob smiled. "I would have liked to meet them. They raised a remarkable daughter." The simple sincerity of the words made Mara's throat tight. She looked away, blinking hard, and Jacob seemed to understand her need for a moment to compose herself. He returned to the pot, stirring and adjusting the heat, giving her space. They ate together at the wooden table, the stew hot and hearty and exactly what Mara's exhausted body needed. Jacob had also made flat bread to go with it, and Mara discovered she was hungry enough to eat 3 full bowls before she finally felt satisfied. "Tomorrow will be different," Jacob said as they cleaned up the dishes. "The healer's test. I do not know much about medicine, so that will fall more to your skills than mine." "I will do my best," Mara said. "My mother was a skilled healer. I learned everything she could teach me before she died, but there will be things I do not know, treatments I have never performed. What if I make a mistake? What if I harm someone instead of helping them?" "Then we will deal with it together," Jacob said. "And I doubt you will make mistakes. You strike me as someone who is very careful with things that matter." Mara wanted to believe him, but anxiety coiled tight in her belly. The first test had been straightforward: clear the field or fail. But healing was complex, full of nuance and uncertainty. A wrong diagnosis, an incorrect remedy, and someone could die. The weight of that responsibility felt crushing. "Get some rest," Jacob said gently. "You will need your strength for tomorrow. And Mara, you truly can sleep in the house. I have a spare room. It would be more comfortable than the barn. Mara hesitated, tempted, but she shook her head. Thank you, but no. I do not want to give the villagers any more reasons to criticize you. If they learn an orc woman is sleeping in your house, they will make assumptions. Ugly ones. Jacob's jaw tightened. I do not care what they assume. But I do, Mara said softly. You have already risked so much for me, I will not risk your reputation as well. She could see Jacob wanted to argue, but finally he nodded. At least take extra blankets. It will be cold tonight. He loaded her arms with thick wool blankets, and Mara carried them out to the barn, grateful for his thoughtfulness. The hay loft was indeed cold, but with the extra blankets and the warmth of the horses below, it was bearable. She curled into her makeshift bed and tried to quiet her racing thoughts. Tomorrow she would face Mistress Elspeth and whatever injuries or illnesses presented themselves. She would have to prove to the council that an orc could heal as well as harm, could create rather than destroy. And she would have to do it all while being watched by people who expected, perhaps, even hoped for her to fail. She was still awake when she heard the barn door open quietly and Jacob's footsteps on the ladder to the loft. I thought you might like some company, he said, settling into the hay a respectful distance away. Tomorrow is weighing on you, I can tell. Am I that obvious? Mara asked. Only to someone who is paying attention, Jacob said. Do you want to talk about it? Mara considered, then found herself speaking. I am afraid of failing. Not for myself, I have survived losing everything before. I can survive it again. But I am afraid of failing you. You have been kinder to me than anyone has been in years. The thought of repaying that kindness by costing you your home, your place here, it makes me feel ill. Mara, Jacob said, and his voice was gentle but firm. You are not responsible for my choices. I chose to sponsor you. I chose to take these tests. If we fail, that is on both of us, not just you. And honestly, even if we do fail, even if the council forces us both to leave, I think I would still make the same choice. Because what they are doing to you is wrong, and I could not stand by and watch it happen without trying to help. Why? Mara whispered. Why do you care so much? You barely know me. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Do you remember when you helped me with my wagon? When you pulled it free from the mud, of course, Mara said. You were struggling. It seemed wrong not to help. I had been stuck there for 2 hours, Jacob said, completely alone on that frozen road. 3 other people passed by before you came along, 3 humans. They all saw me struggling and they all kept walking. They could not be bothered to stop and help a neighbor. But you, an orc, a stranger, someone who had every reason to distrust humans given how we have treated your kind, you stopped. You did not hesitate. You just helped. He shifted in the hay, and Mara could feel his gaze on her in the darkness. That told me more about your character than any test ever could. So when I heard the council was going to judge you, going to put you through their trials designed to push you out, I knew I had to do something. Because you deserve better than their prejudice and their fear. Mara felt tears prickling at her eyes again, and this time she let them fall. No one would see in the darkness, and somehow it felt safe to cry with Jacob nearby, his presence steady and warm. Thank you, she said, her voice rough with emotion, for seeing me, for not just seeing an orc. I see, Mara, Jacob said simply. That is all I have ever seen. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the horses shifting below and the wind sighing around the barn walls. Eventually, Jacob stood to leave, but paused at the top of the ladder. We will pass tomorrow's test, he said. I believe that. Try to rest. After he left, Mara found that sleep came more easily. The anxiety was still there, but it no longer felt overwhelming. She was not facing tomorrow alone. She had a partner, someone who believed in her. That made all the difference. Morning arrived too quickly, bringing with it a gray sky heavy with the promise of more snow. Mara washed in the cold water from the barn pump and braided her dark hair back from her face, then met Jacob at the house. He had prepared a simple breakfast of porridge and dried fruit, and they ate quickly, neither of them particularly hungry, but knowing they needed fuel for the day ahead. Mistress Elspeth's home sat near the center of the village, a sturdy cottage with herbs hanging from the eaves and the sharp scent of medicinal plants drifting from the windows. The healer herself answered their knock, a woman of perhaps 60 years, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "So you are the orc the council is testing," she said without preamble, looking Mara up and down. "And you, Jacob Thornwood, are the fool who decided to sponsor her. Come in, then. We have work to do." The cottage interior was organized chaos. Bundles of herbs hung from every available beam. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with jars and bottles and wooden boxes labeled in neat script. A large table dominated the center of the room, its surface scrubbed clean and ready for patients. The air smelled of sage and lavender and something astringent that made Mara's nose wrinkle. "You claim to have healing knowledge," Mistress Elspeth said, turning to Mara. "Tell me what you see here." She gestured to a shelf of dried plants. Mara stepped closer, examining the bundles and jars. Yarrow for bleeding and fever, willow bark for pain, calendula for wounds, chamomile for stomach ailments and sleep, comfrey for broken bones, though it must be used carefully or it can cause harm, elderberry for winter sickness, nettle for joint pain and to build strength. She continued through the shelf, naming each herb and its uses, her mother's voice echoing in her memory as she recalled the lessons learned so long ago. When she finished, Mistress Elspeth's expression had shifted from skeptical to thoughtful. "Well," the healer said, "you know your plants at least, but knowing and doing are different things. We will see how you manage with actual patients." She turned to Jacob. "And you? What healing knowledge do you possess?" "Almost none," Jacob admitted. "I can set a simple splint and clean a wound, but beyond that I am useless. I am here to help however I can, though." "Honest, at least," Mistress Elspeth said. "Very well, Jacob, you can prepare supplies. Mara, you will assist me directly. The first patient should arrive soon." The first patient was a child, a girl of perhaps 7 years with a nasty cough that rattled in her chest. Her mother hovered anxiously as Mistress Elspeth examined the girl, then stepped back and gestured for Mara to do the same. Mara approached carefully, conscious of the mother's frightened eyes on her green skin and tusks. "Hello," she said gently to the girl. "I am Mara. Can you tell me how long you have had this cough?" "3 days," the girl whispered, then coughed again, the sound wet and harsh. Mara listened to the girl's breathing, checked her temperature with a hand to her forehead, examined her throat and the color of her skin. "It is settling in her lungs," she told Mistress Elspeth. "If it is not treated, it could become lung fever." "And what would you prescribe?" the healer asked. "A tea of elderberry and thyme to fight the sickness," Mara said. "Honey to soothe the throat and help with the cough. Steam inhalations with eucalyptus to clear the lungs, and rest, lots of rest with extra blankets to keep her warm." Mistress Elspeth nodded slowly. "That is what I would recommend as well. Prepare the remedies." Mara worked carefully, measuring dried elderberries and thyme into a cloth bag, adding a jar of honey from Mistress Elspeth's stores, writing out instructions for the steam treatment in careful script. The mother watched her every move with suspicion, but when Mara handed over the remedies with gentle instructions on how to use them, the woman's expression softened just slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly, then added to the girl, "What do you say?" "Thank you, Miss Mara," the girl said, and gave her a shy smile. The warmth that small smile kindled in Mara's chest carried her through the next patient, an old man with aching joints, and the next, a young woman with terrible headaches. For each one, Mistress Elspeth had Mara examine, diagnose, and prescribe treatment, only stepping in to correct or guide when necessary. Jacob helped by preparing supplies, fetching water, keeping the fire going, and generally making himself useful in whatever way Mistress Elspeth directed. By midday, Mara felt cautiously optimistic. She had handled each case competently, and while Mistress Elspeth had not offered any praise, neither had she criticized. The patients had been wary at first, but most seemed to soften when they saw that Mara was gentle and knowledgeable. Then the door burst open and a young man stumbled in, his arm cradled against his chest and blood seeping through his fingers. "Help," he gasped. "Saw accident at the mill." "My hand." Mistress Elspeth moved quickly, guiding the man to the table. When he pulled his hand away, Mara saw immediately that it was bad. A deep gash across his palm, bleeding freely, and at least 2 fingers bent at unnatural angles. "Can you save it?" the man asked, his face white with pain and fear. "Can you save my hand?" "We will do our best," Mistress Elspeth said, then looked at Mara. "Well, what do you do first?" Mara's mind raced, sorting through everything her mother had taught her. "Stop the bleeding," she said. "Clean the wound, set the broken fingers, then stitch it closed and bandage it properly." "Then do it," Mistress Elspeth said. "I will watch." Mara stared at her. "You want me to? If you are to be a healer in this village, you must be able to handle this," the healer said firmly. "So handle it. I will intervene if you make a serious mistake, but otherwise this is your test." Mara took a breath to steady herself, then nodded. "Jacob, I need clean cloth for pressure on the wound. Mistress Elspeth, your sharpest needle and strongest thread, and something for the pain willow bark tea quickly." They moved to obey, and Mara focused on the injured man. "What is your name?" she asked, keeping her voice calm and soothing. "Thomas," he said through gritted teeth. "Thomas Miller." "Well, Thomas Miller, I am going to fix your hand," Mara said. "It is going to hurt, but I will be as gentle as I can. Try to breathe slowly. In through your nose, out through your mouth." "Can you do that for me?" Thomas nodded, and Mara could see him trying to control his breathing, to master the pain and panic. Jacob returned with the cloth, and Mara pressed it firmly to the wound to slow the bleeding. Mistress Elspeth brought the needle and thread, already prepared, and set them aside along with a bowl of clean water and strips of clean linen for bandages. "Drink this," Jacob said, helping Thomas sip the willow bark tea. It would not eliminate the pain, but it would help take the edge off. When the bleeding had slowed enough, Mara cleaned the wound carefully, making sure no splinters or debris remained. Thomas hissed with pain but held still, his free hand clenched white-knuckled on the edge of the table. "The fingers next," Mara said. "This is going to be the worst part, Thomas." "I am sorry." She set the broken bones as quickly and efficiently as she could, feeling for the proper alignment, listening for the click that meant the bones had seated correctly. Thomas made a strangled sound of pain, and Jacob moved to brace him, one steadying hand on his shoulder. "You are doing well," Jacob said. "It is almost over." With the fingers set and splinted, Mara turned her attention to the gash itself. The stitching had to be precise. Too loose and the wound would not close properly, too tight and it would not heal well. Her mother had made her practice on pig skin until her stitches were small and even, and Mara fell back on that training now, her hands steady despite the weight of everyone's eyes on her. She worked in focused silence, each stitch careful and deliberate. Thomas had gone pale and quiet, his eyes half closed, whether from the pain or the willow bark tea, Mara could not say. But he held still, trusting her to finish the work. When the last stitch was tied off, Mara bandaged the hand carefully, wrapping it firmly but not so tight as to cut off circulation. "There," she said, sitting back. "It is done." Thomas looked at his bandaged hand, then at Mara. "Will I be able to use it again, to work?" "If you follow my instructions exactly, yes," Mara said. "Keep it clean and dry. Change the bandages every 2 days. Come back in a week so I can." She stopped, realizing she might not be here in a week. "So Mistress Elspeth can check the healing. Do not use the hand at all for at least a month, longer if the healer says so. If you see redness spreading or if it starts to smell bad, come back immediately." "I will," Thomas said. "Thank you. I was so afraid I would lose it." After he left, Mistress Elspeth examined the leftover supplies, the bloodied cloths, the way Mara had organized the workspace. Finally, she nodded. "You have genuine skill," she said, and it was the first real approval Mara had heard from her. "Your technique is good. You remained calm under pressure, and you have a gentle manner with patients, which is rarer than you might think." "Thank you," Mara said, surprised and grateful for the praise. The afternoon brought more patients: a child with a splinter deeply embedded in his foot, an elderly woman with a persistent cough, a man who needed his spectacles adjusted. For each one, Mara worked carefully, with Mistress Elspeth's sharp eyes watching but rarely interfering. Jacob continued to help where he could, and Mara noticed how kind he was with the patients, how he had a knack for putting them at ease. As sunset approached and the last patient departed, Mistress Elspeth made a pot of tea and poured 3 cups. She sat at her work table and gestured for Mara and Jacob to join her. "I will report to the council that you passed the second test," she said without preamble. "You, Mara, have proven yourself a competent healer, better than competent, actually. You have the knowledge and the temperament for the work." Relief flooded through Mara so intensely she felt dizzy with it. "Thank you, Mistress Elspeth. That means a great deal." The healer's expression softened slightly. "I will tell you something, girl. I did not want to test you. I thought it was foolishness, the council's prejudice dressed up as fairness. But Elder Brennan insisted, and I cannot refuse the council's directive." She sipped her tea. "I am glad I was wrong. You will make a fine healer if they let you stay." "You think they will?" Jacob asked. "Let her stay, I mean." Mistress Elspeth sighed. "That depends on tomorrow's test, the time in the shrine. That one is not about skill or strength. It is about whether the council believes an orc can truly be trusted, can truly commit to living peacefully among humans. I cannot predict how that will go." She looked at Mara directly. "But I can tell you this: you have proven yourself to me. Whatever the council decides, know that you have my respect." Those words carried Mara through the walk back to Jacob's farm, through another shared meal, through the quiet evening as they prepared for the final test tomorrow. She felt the weight of the last challenge ahead, the uncertainty of what it would bring, but she also felt something new: hope. Real, genuine hope that perhaps she could find a place here, a home among humans who would see her as Mistress Elspeth had come to see her. That night, Jacob again came out to the barn to sit with her in the hay loft. It was becoming a comfortable routine, these quiet conversations in the darkness. "One more test," he said. "Then it is finished." "One more test," Mara echoed. "The time of reflection in the shrine. I do not know what to expect." "I think that is the point," Jacob said. "It is meant to test your resolve, your commitment. A day alone with nothing but your thoughts, no food or water, no comfort. It will not be easy." "Will you truly take this test with me?" Mara asked. "We will be separated, each alone. There is no way for you to help me through this one." "No," Jacob agreed. "But we will be facing it at the same time, going through the same trial. That is something. And when we emerge at sunset tomorrow, we will face the council's judgment together." Mara looked at him in the dim light filtering through the barn walls. Jacob, if they grant me permission to stay, what happens then? What happens to us? Jacob was quiet for a moment. I have been thinking about that, he said slowly. And I hope that we could continue as we have been, partners, friends. Maybe you could apprentice with Mistress Elspeth, become the village's second healer. Maybe you could live on the farm, help with the work. We could build a proper cottage for you, something better than a barn loft. You have thought about this, Mara said softly. I have thought about little else, Jacob admitted. Because somewhere between pulling my wagon from the mud and sitting in this barn talking to you, I realized that I do not want you to leave. Even if the council approves your staying in the territory, I want you to stay here, with me. Mara's heart stuttered in her chest. Jacob, I know it is complicated, he said quickly. I know people will talk, will judge. I know that an orc and a human, even just as friends, will raise eyebrows and cause trouble, but I do not care. You have become important to me, Mara. More important than I expected. And if there is a chance for us to build something good together, I want to take it. Mara did not trust herself to speak. Her throat was tight with emotion, with feelings she had not let herself acknowledge until this moment. She reached out in the darkness and found Jacob's hand, lacing her green fingers through his human ones. I want that too, she whispered. I have been afraid to hope for it, afraid to believe it could be possible. But yes, I want to stay. I want to build something with you. Jacob squeezed her hand gently. Then we will. After tomorrow, after we pass this final test, we will figure out how to make it work. Together. They sat hand in hand in the quiet barn, and Mara felt something settle in her chest, something warm and bright and achingly fragile. This was what she had been searching for since her clan cast her out, not just a place to live, but a place to belong. And more than that, a person who saw her, truly saw her, and chose to stand beside her. Morning came too soon, as mornings always did. Mara and Jacob walked to the old stone shrine in silence, their breath misting in the cold air. The shrine sat beyond the village boundary, a small ancient structure of rough-hewn stone that predated the human settlement. No one knew who had built it or what god it had once honored. Now it served primarily as a place for meditation and penance. Elder Brennan waited at the entrance with several other council members. His expression was as cold and severe as ever. The rules are simple, he said. You will each enter the shrine alone and remain there until sunset. No food, no water, no communication with each other or anyone else. When the sun touches the horizon, you may emerge. If you leave early, you fail. If you are found to have smuggled in food or water, you fail. You understand, we understand, Mara and Jacob said in unison. Then enter, Elder Brennan said. The shrine interior was small and dim, lit only by the gray light filtering through narrow windows. It was divided into 2 chambers by a stone wall, each barely large enough for a person to sit or stand. The floor was bare stone, cold and unforgiving. There were no furnishings, no comforts of any kind. Mara entered her chamber and heard Jacob's footsteps in the one adjacent. She sat on the cold floor, arranged her cloak around herself for warmth, and heard the heavy wooden door close behind them with a sound of terrible finality. Then there was only silence and her own thoughts. The first hour was not so bad. Mara sat in meditation, focusing on her breathing, letting her mind settle. She thought about the past 2 days, about the test she had passed, about Jacob standing up for her before the council. She thought about Mistress Elspeth's respect and the small smile from the sick child. These were good thoughts, hopeful thoughts. The second hour brought hunger, a gnawing emptiness in her belly. Mara ignored it, focusing instead on memories of her mother's teachings. She recited the names of healing herbs in her mind, remembered the feel of her mother's hands guiding hers as she learned to prepare remedies. The memories were bittersweet but comforting. By the third hour, thirst became an issue. Mara's mouth felt dry, her throat scratchy. The cold had seeped into her bones despite her cloak, and she could not seem to get warm. She stood and paced the small chamber, trying to keep her blood moving, trying to distract herself from discomfort. The fourth hour brought doubt. What was the point of this test? What was it meant to prove? That she could endure discomfort. That she was stubborn. How did sitting alone in a cold room demonstrate her worthiness to live among humans? The questions circled in her mind, and she had no answers. By the fifth hour, the doubt had deepened into something darker. What if she passed all the tests and the council still rejected her? What if this was all for nothing, just cruelty disguised as fairness? What if Jacob's sponsorship meant nothing in the face of their prejudice? Mara sat with her back against the cold stone wall and let the dark thoughts come. She examined them, acknowledged them, and then slowly began to push back against them. Yes, the council might still reject her. Yes, this might all be pointless, but she had to try. She had to believe that standing up for what was right, that proving herself, that Jacob's faith in her, all meant something. The sixth hour brought a strange clarity. In the dim quiet of the shrine, with nothing to distract her, Mara could see her life with unusual sharpness. She had been running for 6 months, moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to be noticed, to be judged. She had been alone and afraid and purposeless. But these past few days had shown her another possibility. Working in the field beside Jacob, their rhythms synchronizing as they cleared the stones, treating patients under Mistress Elspeth's watchful eye, using her mother's knowledge to help people, sitting in the barn loft at night, talking and laughing and sharing stories. These were not the moments of a fugitive or an outcast. These were the moments of someone building a life. She wanted that life. She wanted it with an intensity that surprised her. The seventh hour brought acceptance. Whatever the council decided, she had done her best. She had proven herself capable, skilled, and committed. If that was not enough for them, then the fault lay with their prejudice, not with her worth. And if they did reject her, she would leave with her head high, knowing that she had tried. In the eighth hour, Mara realized she could hear sounds from Jacob's chamber through the stone wall's small movements, the rustle of cloth. It was strangely comforting, knowing he was there, enduring the same trial. She placed her palm flat against the cold stone wall, imagining him on the other side. "We are almost there," she whispered, too quietly for him to hear but needing to say it anyway. "Just a little longer." The ninth hour dragged by in cold and hunger and thirst. The 10th was worse. By the 11th, Mara had lost track of time entirely, drifting in a strange state between waking and sleeping, her mind wandering through memories and dreams. She saw her mother's face, smiling and proud. She heard her father's laugh, warm and deep. She saw the village where she had grown up. Before the new war, Chief had poisoned everything with his ambition and cruelty. She saw the life she might have had if things had been different, a life of healing and learning and belonging. Then she saw Jacob, his steady blue eyes and kind smile. She saw the farm in spring, fields green and growing. She saw herself working beside him, planting and harvesting and building. She saw a future, bright and possible and achingly close. "Let me have this," she whispered to whatever gods might be listening. "Please, I have lost so much. Let me have this one thing." The light through the narrow windows had shifted, growing orange and golden. Sunset was approaching. Mara dragged herself to her feet, her body stiff and aching from the cold and the hours of sitting. She smoothed down her cloak and braided her hair, trying to look presentable despite her exhaustion. When the door finally opened, The fresh air felt like a benediction. Mara stepped out of the shrine on shaking legs and found Jacob emerging from the other chamber at the same moment. He looked as tired as she felt, his face drawn and his eyes shadowed, but he smiled when he saw her. "We made it," he said hoarsely. "We made it," Mara agreed. Elder Brennan and the council members stood waiting in the fading light. They formed a semicircle around the shrine entrance, their expressions grave and formal. "You have completed the 3 tests," Elder Brennan said. "You cleared the northern field. You proved competent in healing. You endured the time of reflection. Now the council must deliberate and decide whether you, Mara of the northern Orc clans, will be permitted to reside in our territory." "And what of Jacob Thornwood?" asked one of the other council members, a woman with sharp features and gray streaking her dark hair. "He sponsored the Orc. He took the tests with her. What is his status?" "Jacob is a citizen in good standing," Elder Brennan said, "unless we find cause to revoke that status." The council members withdrew a short distance away, huddling together and speaking in low voices. Mara could not hear what they were saying, but she could see the gestures, the sharp motions of disagreement, the occasional glance back toward her and Jacob. Jacob moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "I meant what I said. I do not regret sponsoring you. And I do not regret accepting your help," Mara said. "You have given me hope, Jacob. Whatever else comes, thank you for that." The council's deliberation seemed to stretch forever, though it was probably only minutes. Finally they returned, their faces grave. Elder Brennan stepped forward. "The council has reached a decision," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet evening air, "concerning Mara of the northern Orc clans and her request to reside in our territory." Mara held her breath, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Beside her, Jacob stood rigid with tension. "You have passed the 3 tests," Elder Brennan continued. "Your strength, your skill, and your endurance have been proven." However, Mara's stomach dropped. There was always a however. "The council remains divided on whether your presence here is wise. Some among us believe you have proven yourself. Others fear that an Orc, no matter how skilled or well-intentioned, represents a danger to our community. That you may revert to savage ways, or that your presence will draw the attention of Orc war bands seeking revenge for a traitor to their kind." "She is not a traitor," Jacob said, his voice hard. "She chose peace over violence. That is not betrayal. That is courage." "You are biased," Elder Brennan said. "Your judgment is clouded by your inappropriate attachment to this creature." "She is not a creature," Jacob shot back. "She is a person. Her name is Mara. Use it." The tension crackled like lightning in the air. Mara put a hand on Jacob's arm, felt the anger thrumming through him like a living thing. "Please," she said quietly, "let him finish." Elder Brennan's expression was cold. "As I was saying, the council is divided. In such cases, our charter requires a majority vote. The vote was taken. The result," he paused, and Mara saw something that might have been reluctant respect flicker across his face. "The result is that permission is granted. By a margin of 1 vote, the council has decided to allow you to reside in this territory." Mara felt her knees go weak with relief. Jacob caught her elbow, steadying her, and she could see the fierce joy in his eyes. "However," Elder Brennan said, and his tone hardened again, "this permission comes with conditions. You will report to Mistress Elspeth twice weekly to assist her in her healing work. You will maintain no contact with any Orc clans or individuals. You will cause no trouble, start no conflicts, and give us no reason to regret this decision. If you violate any of these conditions, your permission to stay will be immediately revoked. Is this understood?" "Yes," Mara said, her voice shaking only slightly. "I understand, and I agree to the conditions. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this chance." Elder Brennan nodded stiffly. "See that you earn it." He turned to Jacob. "As for you, Jacob Thornwood, your sponsorship has been fulfilled. You have passed the tests alongside her. Your status as a citizen in good standing is maintained. However, I would advise you to consider your reputation carefully. The company you keep reflects upon you." "My reputation can handle it," Jacob said evenly, "and the company I keep is my own business." "Indeed," Elder Brennan said. "The council's judgment is rendered. You are both dismissed." The council members dispersed, some looking satisfied, others clearly unhappy with the decision. But it did not matter. Mara had permission to stay. She could build a life here. The future she had imagined in the shrine was suddenly, impossibly real. Jacob turned to her, and his smile was brilliant. "You did it," he said. "We did it." "We did," Mara agreed. And then suddenly she was laughing, giddy with relief and exhaustion and sheer, overwhelming joy. Jacob laughed with her, and on impulse he swept her into a hug, lifting her briefly off her feet. When he set her down, they were both still grinning like fools. "Come on," Jacob said. "Let us go home. I think we have earned a proper celebration." Home. The word settled warm in Mara's chest. She had a home now. She had a place to belong. They walked back to the farm through the gathering dusk, and this time when they passed through the village, Mara held her head high. Some of the villagers still stared, still whispered, but others nodded politely or even offered small smiles. Word of the council's decision had clearly spread quickly. At the farm, Jacob built up the fire and prepared a feast, or as much of a feast as could be managed from his winter stores. There was roasted chicken and fresh bread and preserved vegetables, and even a precious jar of honey for sweetening tea. They ate until they were both stuffed and drowsy, the warmth of the fire and the food and the companionship seeping into Mara's bones, pushing out the cold and fear and uncertainty that had lived there for so long. "I cannot believe it is real," Mara said, setting down her empty plate. "That I can actually stay." "It is real," Jacob assured her. "And tomorrow we will start figuring out what comes next. We should probably build you a proper cottage, something with a real bed and a stove. I have been thinking about where it should go, maybe near the south field, where it gets good sun in the morning." "You do not have to do that," Mara protested. "The barn is fine." "The barn is not fine," Jacob said firmly. "Not for permanent living. You deserve better. And besides, if you are going to be helping Mistress Elspeth regularly, you will need a proper place to store your herbs and remedies. The barn is too damp for that." Mara felt warmth bloom in her chest. He had thought about this, planned for it. He truly wanted her to stay, to build a life here. "Jacob," she said softly, "why are you doing all this? I know you said you wanted to help, but this is more than help. This is caring about you," Jacob said, meeting her eyes. "This is wanting you in my life as more than just someone I helped once. I know it is complicated. I know people will talk, but I do not care, Mara. These past few days, facing the tests with you, sitting in that cold shrine and knowing you were on the other side of the wall, it made me realize something." He reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm around hers. "I have been alone for a long time," he said. "After my parents died, I told myself I was fine with it, that I did not need anyone else, that the farm was enough. But it was not enough. I was just existing, not living. And then you came into my life, and suddenly everything felt different, brighter, more hopeful, like the future could be something good instead of just more of the same lonely days." Mara's eyes stung with tears. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "You have given me back something I thought I had lost forever. The belief that I could belong somewhere, that I could be wanted for who I am instead of what I am." "You are wanted," Jacob said. By me. Very much. They sat together as the fire burned low, hands clasped across the table, and Mara felt something shift between them. It was not just friendship anymore, not just gratitude or companionship. It was something deeper, something that made her heart race and her breath catch. "I should probably go to the barn," she said eventually, though she made no move to stand. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be busy." "Or," Jacob said carefully, "you could stay in the house, in the spare room. We are past worrying about what the villagers think, I believe, and it is cold out there." Mara considered, then nodded. "All right, thank you." The spare room was small but comfortable, with a real bed and clean linens and a window that looked out over the dark fields. Mara lay down in the soft bed and pulled the quilts up to her chin, and for the first time in 6 months, she felt truly safe. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Jacob began construction on a cottage for Mara, enlisting the help of a few neighbors who seemed willing to look past their prejudice in exchange for honest work and fair pay. Mara apprenticed formally with Mistress Elspeth, learning the nuances of the healer's craft and beginning to build trust with the village patients. It was not always easy. There were still those who refused to be treated by the orc woman, who muttered dark predictions about her true nature being revealed eventually. But there were others who came to appreciate her skill and gentle manner, who began to see her as Mara the healer rather than Mara the orc. Jacob was a constant presence and support, helping however he could. When Mara came home exhausted from a long day with difficult patients, he had a hot meal waiting. When she struggled with the suspicion and fear some villagers still showed, he listened and reminded her that she belonged here. When she doubted herself, he believed in her. Home. The word had come so naturally to Mara's thoughts. Jacob's farm had become home, and Jacob himself had become the center of her world in a way that was both terrifying and wonderful. Spring came slowly, the snow melting in fits and starts, the frozen earth gradually softening. By the time the first green shoots began appearing in the fields, Mara's cottage was finished, a cozy structure with a large room for living and sleeping, a smaller room for storing and preparing medicines, and a wide hearth that kept everything warm. The day she moved in, Jacob helped her carry her few belongings from the farmhouse. It was not much: some clothes, her mother's herb kit, a few books Mistress Elspeth had gifted her. But it was hers, her own space in a home of her own. "What do you think?" Jacob asked, watching her move around the cottage, touching the smooth wooden walls, testing the firmness of the bed. "It is perfect," Mara said honestly. "I cannot believe this is mine." "You earned it," Jacob said. "Every bit of it." That evening they sat on the porch of Mara's new cottage, watching the sun set over the fields. The air was warmer now, carrying the scent of growing things and the promise of summer ahead. "I have been thinking," Jacob said, a hint of nervousness in his voice that Mara had not heard before. "About us, about what we are to each other." Mara's heart started to beat faster. "What about us?" Jacob turned to face her, and in the golden light of the setting sun his eyes were very blue and very serious. "I care about you, Mara, more than care about you. I think I might be falling in love with you. Actually, I know I am falling in love with you. I have been for weeks now, maybe longer." Mara's breath caught. "Jacob." "I know it is complicated," he continued quickly. "I know that humans and orcs are not supposed to, that people will talk and judge and make things difficult. But I do not care about any of that. I only care about you and how I feel when I am with you. You make me happy, Mara. Happier than I have been in years. And if you want, I would like to try to be together. Properly." Mara felt tears pricking at her eyes, but these were good tears, happy tears. "I am falling in love with you too," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I have been afraid to say it, afraid to even think it." Because I did not believe I could have you. But I do love you, Jacob. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you stood up for me when no one else would. I love how you make me laugh and how safe I feel when you are near. I love you." Jacob's smile was brilliant and relieved and so full of joy that Mara felt her heart might burst. He reached for her hand and she gave it willingly, their fingers intertwining in the way that had become familiar and precious. "Then we are agreed," Jacob said. "We are together. Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," Mara agreed. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Mara did not want to pull away. She met him halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that was sweet and gentle and full of promise. It was Mara's first kiss, and it felt like coming home, like finding something she had not known she was searching for. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. Jacob rested his forehead against hers, and they sat that way for a long moment, simply breathing together, savoring the moment. "I should probably warn you," Jacob said eventually, "that the village is going to have opinions about this." "Let them have their opinions," Mara said. "I have spent my whole life being judged for things I cannot control. I am not going to let anyone's prejudice stop me from being happy. Not anymore." "Good," Jacob said, "because I have no intention of letting you go." The weeks turned into months and spring gave way to summer. Mara and Jacob's relationship became an open secret in the village, and while some people disapproved, many more came to accept it. Mistress Elspeth was particularly supportive, declaring loudly that anyone who had a problem with Mara and Jacob could take their ailments elsewhere for treatment. Mara's skills as a healer grew, and she began to develop her own patients, people who specifically requested her care. The children especially loved her, finding her tusks and green skin fascinating rather than frightening. She had a way with little ones, a gentleness and patience that put them at ease even during difficult treatments. Jacob's farm flourished with Mara's help. She had a knowledge of plants and growing things that complemented his practical farming skills, and together they coaxed a record harvest from the fields. In the evenings, they would sit together on Mara's cottage porch or at Jacob's farmhouse table, talking and laughing and planning for the future. It was during one of these evenings, as autumn began to paint the leaves in shades of gold and crimson, that Jacob asked Mara to marry him. They were sitting by the fire in his farmhouse, Mara curled against his side with his arm around her shoulders. It had become their favorite way to spend quiet evenings, close and comfortable and content. "Mara," Jacob said, and something in his tone made her look up. "I have been thinking about our future, about what I want it to look like." "What do you want it to look like?" Mara asked. "I want it to look like this," Jacob said. "You and me together. Building a life, a home, maybe a family someday if that is something you want. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me. I want to grow old with you, watching the seasons change and the years pass. I want to be your partner in everything for the rest of our lives." He shifted, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small carved wooden box. When he opened it, Mara saw a ring inside simple silver with a small green stone set in the band. "This was my mother's," Jacob said. "My father gave it to her when they got married. It is not much, but it is all I have to offer. Mara, will you marry me? Will you be my wife?" Mara stared at the ring, her mind reeling. Marriage. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for, more than she had thought possible. But looking at Jacob's earnest face, at the love shining in his eyes, she knew there was only one answer. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." Jacob's whoop of joy was so loud it startled the chickens in the yard. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the green stone catching the firelight, and then pulled her into a kiss that was deeper and more passionate than any they had shared before. When they finally came up for air, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time. "We are getting married," Jacob said, like he could not quite believe it. "You are going to be my wife." "And you are going to be my husband," Mara said, testing out the word. It felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. "Though I am not sure the village is ready for an orc wedding." "Then the village will have to get ready," Jacob said firmly. "I am not hiding this. I am not treating our marriage like something shameful. We are going to do this properly with a ceremony and a celebration and everyone invited." "Are you sure?" Mara asked. "It will cause talk." "Some people will be angry." "Let them be angry," Jacob said. "I am marrying the woman I love. Anyone who cannot accept that can stay away." They set the date for late autumn after the harvest was complete and before the snows began. Mistress Elspeth agreed to help with the preparations, and to Mara's surprise, several other village women offered their assistance as well. It seemed that while some people might never accept an orc among them, others had been won over by Mara's kindness and skill and quiet determination. The ceremony was held in the village square on a crisp October afternoon, with the trees ablaze in autumn colors and a cool wind carrying the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. Nearly the whole village turned out, some to celebrate, some out of curiosity, some perhaps hoping for scandal. Elder Brennan performed the ceremony, his expression suggesting he was swallowing something sour but determined to maintain propriety. Mara wore a simple dress of deep green that Mistress Elspeth had helped her make, and wild flowers woven into her dark hair. Jacob wore his best clothes, his hair neatly combed and his face shining with happiness. "We are gathered here," Elder Brennan began, his voice carrying across the square, "to witness the union of Jacob Thornwood and Mara in marriage. This is an unusual circumstance. I do not have to tell you all. A human and an orc seeking to join their lives. But our laws do not forbid such a union, and both parties have proven themselves to be of good character and sound mind." He went through the traditional vows, asking Jacob if he took Mara as his wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse in sickness and in health, until death parted them. Jacob's "I do" rang out clear and certain, his eyes never leaving Mara's face. Then it was Mara's turn, and she spoke her vows with a full heart, promising to love and honor Jacob, to stand beside him through whatever life brought, to be his partner and companion and friend until her last breath. When she said, "I do," she saw tears glinting in Jacob's eyes, though he was smiling. "Then by the authority vested in me by this community," Elder Brennan said, sounding resigned to his fate, "I declare you husband and wife. You may kiss." Jacob cupped Mara's face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle, and kissed her as the gathered villagers applauded. Some applause was enthusiastic, some polite, but it was applause nonetheless. When they turned to face the crowd as husband and wife, Mara saw acceptance on many faces, even a few that had once shown only fear and suspicion. The celebration that followed was held in Jacob's farmyard, with tables laden with food and drink that the guests had contributed. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts. Mistress Elspeth gave a speech praising Mara's dedication to healing and Jacob's courage in standing up for what was right. Even Elder Brennan grudgingly offered his wishes for their happiness, though he left early. As the sun set and the party continued around them, Jacob led Mara away from the crowd to a quiet spot overlooking the fields. "How are you feeling, wife?" he asked, the title clearly giving him joy. "Happy," Mara said simply. "Happier than I ever thought possible, husband." They stood together watching the last light fade from the sky, and Mara thought about the journey that had brought her here. From an outcast fleeing her clan to a woman with a home, a profession, a community, and now a husband who loved her. It seemed impossible, like something from a story rather than real life. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked softly. "About how much has changed," Mara said. "A year ago I was alone and afraid, sleeping in barns and eating whatever I could find, never staying anywhere long. And now I am here, married to you with a home and work I love. It feels like a dream." "If it is a dream, then I am dreaming it with you," Jacob said. "And I never want to wake up." They returned to the celebration hand in hand and danced together as the stars came out overhead. Mara had never learned human dancing, so Jacob taught her the steps, patient and laughing when she stepped on his toes. By the end of the night, she had gotten the hang of it, and they spun together across the farmyard while their friends and neighbors clapped along. When the last guests finally departed and they were alone, Jacob carried Mara across the threshold of the farmhouse in the traditional manner, both of them laughing at the absurdity and sweetness of it. He set her down gently in their bedroom now, not just his, and pulled her close. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "My wife, my Mara." "I love you," Mara replied. "My husband, my Jacob." They came together in the darkness, learning each other, loving each other, beginning their married life with tenderness and joy. And afterwards, lying tangled together in the soft bed, Mara felt a peace settle over her that she had never known before. This was home. This was love. This was the life she had dreamed of in that cold shrine almost a year ago, and it was real, and it was hers. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were still those in the village who never fully accepted Mara, who muttered about the unnaturalness of a human-orc marriage. There were occasional tensions when orc war bands raided nearby territories, and Mara had to endure suspicious looks and whispered accusations that she might be in league with her former people. But there were far more good days than bad. Mara's reputation as a skilled and compassionate healer continued to grow. When Mistress Elspeth finally retired, she named Mara as her successor, making her the village's primary healer. Children who had been afraid of her green skin and tusks grew up to bring their own children to her for treatment. Their fear long since transformed into trust. Jacob's farm prospered with their combined efforts, becoming one of the most productive in the region. They expanded the house to accommodate a growing family, first a daughter with Jacob's blue eyes and Mara's green-tinged skin, then a son with Mara's tusks and Jacob's dark hair. The children were living proof that love could bridge any divide, and they grew up knowing they were treasured by both their parents and the community that had learned to embrace them. 5 years after that tense day when the council had given Mara 3 tests to stay, Elder Brennan passed away in his sleep. At his funeral, his daughter approached Mara with tears in her eyes. "He wanted me to give you this," she said, pressing a sealed letter into Mara's hands. "He wrote it a few months ago, when he knew his time was growing short." Mara opened the letter that evening, sitting by the fire with Jacob reading over her shoulder. Elder Brennan's spidery handwriting covered the page. "Mara, I owe you an apology that I was too proud to give while I still drew breath. When you came to our village seeking refuge, I saw only an orc, only a potential threat to be driven away. I designed those tests to break you, to give me justification for rejection while maintaining the appearance of fairness. I was wrong. You proved yourself to be a person of remarkable character, skill, and integrity. More than that, your presence here has changed our community for the better. You have taught us that prejudice blinds us to the good in others, that fear prevents us from seeing what we could become. You have my respect and my regret. May your life here be long and happy. Brennan." Mara read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in her medicine chest where she kept her most precious things. It was an apology she had never expected but deeply appreciated. It was proof that people could change, that hearts could soften, that understanding could grow even where fear had once taken root. "He came around in the end," Jacob said, pulling Mara close. "Just like the village did, just like everyone will given time and proof." "Not everyone," Mara said realistically. "There will always be those who cannot see past what I am." "Then they are fools," Jacob said firmly, "and they will miss out on knowing one of the finest people in this territory." Many more years passed, marked by the turning of seasons and the steady rhythm of farm life and healing work. Their children grew, and in time brought home partners of their own. Their daughter married a human boy from the next village over. Their son fell in love with a half-elf trader who passed through regularly. Both couples settled nearby, building their own homes and lives while remaining close to the family. Mara and Jacob grew older together, their hair graying and their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. They still sat together on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the fields they had worked together for so many years. They still held hands and shared quiet conversations and looked at each other with the same tenderness that had marked their early days. One evening, as they sat watching their grandchildren play in the yard, a beautiful mix of human and orc and elf features, all of them healthy and happy and loved, Mara turned to Jacob with a soft smile. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Standing up in that council chamber all those years ago? Taking those tests with me?" Jacob looked at her, at the family they had built, at the life they had created together, and shook his head. "Not for a single moment," he said. "It was the best decision I ever made. The council gave you 3 tests to stay, but you gave me so much more. You gave me love and purpose and a family. You gave me a life worth living." Mara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence. "We gave each other that," she said. "Together." "Together," Jacob agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Always together." They sat that way as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The children's laughter rang out in the twilight, a sound of pure joy and innocence. And Mara knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she belonged. The council had given her 3 tests to stay, designed to drive her away. But Jacob had stood up and taken them with her, had refused to let her face that prejudice alone. And in doing so, he had helped her find not just a place to live, but a place to love, to grow, to build a legacy that would outlast them both. It had not been easy. There had been struggles and setbacks, moments of doubt and fear. But there had also been triumph and joy, love and laughter, the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived and shared with the person who mattered most. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear overhead, Mara and Jacob rose and walked hand in hand into their home, surrounded by the family they had created and the community they had helped to change. Behind them, the fields lay ready for another planting season, another year of growth and harvest. Ahead of them, whatever years remained, to be faced together with the same courage and love that had brought them this far. The council's tests had been meant to prove Mara unworthy, to give them excuse to cast her out. Instead, those tests had proven that love could overcome prejudice, that standing together made people stronger, that the bonds of partnership and commitment could bridge any divide. They had proven that an orc woman and a human man could build something beautiful together, something that would endure long after the old fears and hatreds had faded into memory. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all, not just passing the tests, but transforming them into the foundation of a love story that would be told in the village for generations to come. The story of the orc bride who faced 3 impossible tests and the groom who stood up and took them with her, and the life they built together in the fertile fields of understanding and acceptance. It was, Mara thought as she fell asleep that night in Jacob's arms, exactly the happy ending she had once believed impossible. And it was real, and it was hers, and it was enough.